Welcome to Career Conversations. Tonight, our guest is Kim Nova, Director of Product Development at Mystic Access. Thank you for joining us, Kim.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, um, you are blind as a result of retinopathy of prematurity. And do you use Braille or speech when using a computer?
Both. It really depends on what hat I happen to be wearing that day, but generally I will use a combination of both. I have a braille display that sits at my desk continually, and it is something that I love having either to double check something with speech or, as I said, depending on what I'm doing, if I happen to be editing an important document or trying to make sure some formatting is correct or any number of things, then I will absolutely use braille in conjunction with speech. There are times when I will strictly use speech, but that's generally only if I'm doing something like, writing an email to a friend or, something not as professional, or perhaps if I'm reading a news article or something, I will use either. So,
Mhm.
it just depends on the circumstances.
Fabulous. So, you use a Braille display, and what other types of technology do you use in both your daily life and in the world of work?
Yes. Well, generally speaking, in addition to my trusty Braille display, I'll use either JAWS or NVDA, depending on what I'm doing. Sometimes I'll mix them up. I've always found that if you can have a few tools in the toolbox, particularly where screen readers are concerned, having more than one on your computer is usually a good thing because let's take formatting a document, for instance. One, no matter how you set your settings, may be a little more verbose than another, and you might want to change things up a bit. And perhaps that way you can get some additional information. I am also a big fan of the visual interpreting services. Ira is the one I tend to use primarily, and if I ever do need that little bit of assistance, for instance, trying to get a camera set up, love that, then I can find out whether or not I'm in frame or whatever may be happening. I know JAWS has some cool tools to assist with that as well. Because a lot of the work that I do is either audio or writing, those are some of the main things. I have to have a good headset, continually at my disposal. I have to have good editing software. I have to have a decent mic. So it kind of depends on what I'm doing. I wear lots of hats with all the various jobs that I do. So there's quite a plethora of technology, although besides really the screen reader and the braille display, a lot of it is more mainstream tech, but it does depend on the situation again.
Great. So you attended a public school and you were very active in the drama and marching band and show choir,
I
which
was.
I had to admit, I don't know what a show choir is.
It's kind
Uh,
of a theatrical thing. People will, usually sing a lot of old standards and there's
oh,
choreography and things like that. So think of a choir performance, but it's a little more rock and pop, maybe necessarily.
uh-huh.
It's a little more jazz and, it's kind of a more, a less traditional choral experience and maybe something that the people out there will be able to sing along with and, enjoy a little more than perhaps a standard choir concert, maybe.
Get your audience up and moving.
There you go. Absolutely. Yep.
Fabulous. So because you are you do things in the areas of music, do you read Braille music?
I do. I do. I started learning when I started taking piano lessons. I had two really great teachers. I had one when I was very young, and I had one a little later, and she's the one who kind of started me into reading Braille music, which was great for me because by the time I got to college, I at least semi knew what I was doing and had some practice in reading Braille and using Braille music, although ironically enough, because I went to a very small college and at the time was one of the first blind individuals to attend this college, there really wasn't a lot of Braille music available in terms of what we were learning. So, ironically, even though I had the skill, I didn't use it as much as perhaps would have been favorable by me personally. It would have been fun to have more access. So, fortunately, I have a pretty decent memory and was able to rely on memorization for a lot of those parts. But I do love it. I am very grateful that I have the skill, and while I don't get to use it much these days, it's a good tool to have in the toolbox.
It certainly is. I frequently see requests from either teachers that's visually impaired or,
Yes.
parents of children that they want their child to learn mu Braille music. And, um, now there's so much more access to it.
Oh gosh, absolutely. When you used to have just a few hard copy volumes of things one could access, and now just watching that increase so dramatically over the last few years, and then the ability to print music and create your own arrangements and all the things, it's remarkable to watch. I'd love to dive more deeply into that if I can ever find some free time.
Great. So when you went to college, you studied both music and psychology.
I did.
And I see in our bio information that we have that you originally were going to go into uh, music therapy. And
Mhm.
what were you going to go on from your bachelor's degree to get a master's in music therapy,
Mhm.
or were you going to stay at the bachelor's level?
I was. I was going to go on and get my master's. I even went to talk to a university that had a great music therapy program at the time. Went up there and talked to a few people and had some great conversations. And because I had the degrees in both music and psychology, I knew a little bit about music's effects on the brains and
Hmm.
music and how it worked with dementia patients, particularly, and some of these
Yes.
incredible, amazing, miraculous things that happen as a result of music. And I've always found that truly intriguing, and I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to be part of that? So, because I'm a singer and because, I've always enjoyed, creating my own music and, because I love knowing just how beneficial music can be on the mind, body, and soul, I was just intrigued by that and thought, this could be a really cool experience and a really great thing to do. And I was very intrigued by the possibility. I was very excited, and I had a pretty good idea that's what I was going to be when I grew up. Didn't quite happen, but that was
Great.
the plan.
Well, people frequently go into college and either learn that there's other careers, or they say, maybe this is really what I'm going for, or maybe a master's degree will take me to a higher pay grade, things
Hmm.
like that. There's a lot to consider when you are, working on a degree.
Yes.
Um, so, um, one moment, I'm just looking at my notes here. So you then moved into the field of life uh, coaching.
Mm.
And what inspired you to move into that area and to become an entrepreneur um, as a life coach?
I'll tell you, this is a really interesting story and can potentially be a helpful story for others going through the college experience. So, when I thought that music therapy was the way to go, I ran into what I felt could be a few obstacles, and I have no problem jumping over obstacles and clearing hurdles. I'm a tenacious person. That really doesn't bother me. I'm not really phased by change and having to have new experiences. I find that stuff challenging and enjoyable, but I really felt like I had hit a wall, and I really thought, I don't think this dream is going to take me where I necessarily envisioned that it would, or where I thought it might. And I really feel like I kind of sat around in limbo for a couple weeks and sat there and took some deep breaths and said, what am I going to do? Because I kind of feel like, for a lot of reasons, this has panned out, and it's not the dream that I anticipated that it was going to be. It's not going to get me where I intended to go career wise or passion wise. And, I think a lot of different things led to that, but I began to feel kind of unfulfilled and sad and depressed and like, well, what's next? And coaching kind of appeared out of the blue because it was a fairly new profession at the time. And I realized that while it didn't blend music and psychology in the way that music therapy did, perhaps that there was a place here for a lot of my previous studies. And I went to a workshop. And at the time, that was a teleconference. That was way before the days of Zoom or any of the fun things we have now. And I ended up going to this class, and I began talking to a few people. And I spoke to one guy in particular, and he was a psychologist, and he was primarily a therapist. And he said, "Your psychology, your BA, will be such an asset to you in this profession." And when I realized, because I'm someone who, like as I said, love a challenge, love to embrace new challenges. And when I realized that all these different things about entrepreneurship appealed to me so much, I also realized that, well, if you're teaching classes and you're doing all these things, I took so many diction courses for my music degree and learning to speak clearly and enunciate and all of these things that you do as a musician, how beneficial that little piece of music training would be such a big tremendous help to me in a field where I was talking to people all day and when I was presenting and when I was teaching and when I was creating courses. And it
Mhm.
kind of lit me up inside because I realized so quickly that you weren't necessarily tossing out the initial dream. You were just reforming it in a different way. It was just going to come about somewhat differently. And music would find its way back in there somewhere. I knew that somehow. But I also knew that this, in its own way, was going to present so many more challenges and interesting experiences and new people to meet and new people to work with. I love people. I love working with people. I love talking to people. I love kind of finding out what makes each person tick. I love the diversity of all the people one encounters in life. And I thought, this is it. This is it kind of dropped out of the sky for me, and yet it fulfilled the dream so perfectly and so beautifully in such a different way than perhaps I had anticipated with the music therapy. And I'm so glad that I didn't slam a door on something that just appeared as it kind of did for me and say, well, this isn't it because it's not exactly what I initially wanted. It's something
Mhm.
completely different, or it could, potentially feel completely different. But yet there's so many facets of what I've already learned and strived for and worked for throughout my college career that will feed this dream and that will make everything I want to do here in a coaching career even better. So I think that's an important, perhaps, lesson that others could take something from to say, sometimes, and I made a note to make sure that I said this, sometimes the dream is going to perhaps reappear in a surprising way, or perhaps it's going to change a little bit and something really surprising and magical will come out of it, but maybe not in the way you initially expected.
So for how long about did you do coaching, life
I
coaching?
coached for essentially through 2015. So from 2006 to 2015, I was doing some amount of coaching as part of my career path. It was pretty
Hmm.
much my full career path for that amount of time. And, because it's an entrepreneur, as an entrepreneur, building a business, sometimes you have a few clients and sometimes you have more than a few clients. And some years
Hmm.
were great and some years were not as great, but it was all very fulfilling. I met incredible people and I got to teach some really cool classes and learned a lot. And it was just a great experience for me because I could do it from anywhere. I could work remotely. And of course, that's appealing because I could walk into my office in the mornings and begin work from my home office. And that was great. That takes its own sort of discipline. It's a different experience than getting up and actually commuting to the office every day. So my commute was just a few feet as opposed to, getting on a bus and going somewhere or subway or what have you. But I did that for quite a while. And I learned, again, so much from the experience of having to essentially do all parts of the business. And, there were times where I would hire virtual assistants and things like that, but I built my own websites and, just having that much invested in what I was doing was great for me because I love having my hands in lots of different things. And so to me, having that amount of say so over, what the sites look like and all the blogs I was doing and all the writing, I just think it was a great experience for me because I liked all that multifaceted piece of it.
Hmm. Great. So I just want to remind our participants this evening that you can certainly type your questions into either the Q&A box or into the chat, and Katie will be keeping track of those. You can also find the opening code there as well. Um, so moving on to Mystic Access, which is the primary focus of us being here today. Can you tell us a little about Mystic Access and what they currently are working on? And maybe a
Absolutely.
little history as well.
Yeah, love to. Love to. That's a fun story too. So, Mystic Access, we are primarily creators of audio documentation. And while that may sound a little like, what does that mean exactly? So, what we basically do is we take both mainstream and blindness technology and create really solid foundational documentation on that. So, we might take you from what something is, orient you to it, give you some foundational concepts, teach you the basics of how to use it, and then kind of branch into more advanced topics for that particular thing. So we've worked with companies like Humanware, we've worked with APH, we've worked with Blind Shell, Dolphin. There are a number of companies that we've contracted with personally, but we've also done a lot of stuff on our own and created things on things like the Amazon Echo products and Google products, building websites. We did a whole audio course on working with WordPress, which has been very popular. And I had a colleague who said at one time, how would you ever create audio on a braille display that doesn't speak? Well, we made that happen as well. So basically, because so many of us, those of us particularly with who are totally blind or those with low vision as well, so many of us are audio learners. And what better than having somebody be a guide to sit there with you and kind of like in coaching, actually, now that I sit here thinking about it, someone who can sit with you and, perhaps teach you how to get from point A to point B. And certainly while the two are very, very different, in being able to have a nice practical guide there to sit with you and do the steps as you're listening, it can increase one's confidence and make you feel like, oh, I can tackle this machine, whatever this piece of technology is, I can learn this and hopefully become a better, more proficient user of whatever this technology is. So we try and take the stress out of it and make it a fun, enjoyable, low-key listening experience while giving them everything they need to know to use that confidently.
So, what are your duties that you actually handle for Mystic Access in your role as the um, Director of Product Development?
Pretty much everything there is. So as director of product development, my initial goal and my initial role was to say, what do people want? So I would be out there talking to people about what are your pain points? What are the products you most want to learn? What are you feeling frustrated about learning, this technology or that technology? What hangs you up when you're attempting to learn any sort of tech? Where are your stressors? And, I would try and find this out from various people we talk to, whether that be customers or, reading articles, talking to people. And once I kind of had a handle on what people really wanted to learn and kind of watching what was coming into the market as well, what's new, what are people excited about? And then I would say, well, maybe this is something that we should focus on. Maybe this is something that we should do. And then, because at the time there's never been more than three people who worked at Mystic Access at any given time, so we're a very small company. And so everything from the initial layout, outline, research, all the way to the recording, editing, post production stuff, I have a hand in all of that. The only thing I don't do is the Daisy. We do offer our products as Daisy books. And my husband Chris handles that aspect of things. He does the actual Daisy editing and formatting of the Daisy product. So he'll put in the cue points and all those things and make it very much a reference work so that people can easily move from point A to point B and find out specifically what they want to know. So they can jump from one point to another very easily. So everything other than that, I tend to do a lot of the recording work and I also tend to do a lot of the audio editing in the background. So a lot of that is mine, a lot of the outlining is mine. So, and then once you get past that, you have to sell it. You have to create sales pages for it, and you have to go to places and sell it to people. So, conferences and, all these things and, various weekly tech gatherings that people do virtually in the world. So, all of that aspect is things that we do. Where it's very much an entrepreneurial experience, similar to my previous career. And it's very enjoyable, and you kind of have your hands in all of it, all aspects of it. So, whereas, coaching allowed me to ask people questions and kind of help them guide themselves, I'd be, a wellness professional who helped them in discovering, where they may want to be in their lives and, some constructive ways to help them to get there. This is sort of similar to that, except that it's much more a step-by-step, paint-by-numbers process for larger groups of people. So that's very enjoyable. Mystic came about as a result of Chris saying to me one time, there's this product. In this case, it was the Victor Reader Stream from Humanware. And he said, how would you feel like creating documentation on it? And I said, well, I've never worked in this field. I grew up going to public schools. I knew very few blind people. I did not know what I was doing. And I said, frankly, I'm going to feel a little like a fraud trying to create documentation for a market that I really don't know very much about. But he convinced me to try. And so, on a shoestring and a dream, we started creating this documentation. It came to the attention of Humanware. And one thing led to another, and we ended up doing the first version of their Braille Note Touch documentation for them under contract. And that was a huge boost for us. So it was just an example of having a dream and seeing how far we could run with it. We were two people who he had much more experience in the industry than I did. He'd been working on GPS products and things for years, and so he had the doorway, as it were, and I had the teaching experience, and I had done editing and all these things. So we kind of came together as a team, and apparently a pretty good team because we got married 3.5 years ago, and are now a team in life as well as in work. So it's been quite a journey, and just that's kind of how we began things, and it has just progressed from there. And again, such an incredible opportunity to meet so many amazing people from all walks of this community.
Great. So your technology knowledge, pretty much everything you develop for training, you have to learn first how to do it
Absolutely.
on your own, obviously.
Absolutely.
And it's not like you went to college to learn how to use this particular type of technology.
Nope.
You've really developed some great skills in learning how to use things on your own and also learning how to teach others.
Yeah, you kind of have to. I'm the person who, when I was a kid, I would have loved to have read all the printed manuals to everything because I'm just like that. I love to know how stuff works. And of course, back in the days, it was more difficult to access all those things. But had I
Mhm.
had access to them, I would have read the back of the cereal boxes. That's just who I am. I've always been a very voracious reader and, very curious and wanting to know things and learn things. So for me, it's kind of ideal because I might have a manual to go with, but I'm also going to play with things and I'm going to configure things in settings and I'm going to just go through and learn. A lot of what I learned about computers, I'm pretty much self-taught. So I love that aspect of things. I know it scares a lot of people to death, but I'm not that person. I'm somebody who, if I break it, hopefully I can refix it and repair it and get it working properly again. I'm not quite as bad as my husband who used to take things apart and never be able to put them back together again, although I have done a bit of that in my time as well. But I love kind of just kind of jumping in and seeing where things take me, and if I can learn from that, and if my experience can one day be anecdotal for somebody else to say, don't do what I just did, then that's great. I'm perfectly happy to use myself as an example of, maybe you don't want to try X, Y, or Z because something bad will happen. But, if you do, go for the adventure.
So I've known Mystic Access through when you used to do technology training. You
Yes.
saved my life in graduate school teaching me actually it was Chris that taught me the how to use Google Classroom in like, I don't know, less than an hour.
He's brilliant at stuff like that. He really is.
I really thought I was going to fail classes because I just we were using Blackboard and then the semester changed and everything went to Google Classroom and I was like, I don't know what to do. So, yeah, but I found out about that through about the technology training that you guys used to do through your podcast. Um,
Yes.
and I love the way that you do your podcast because very often you take it as, two people who are blind. We encountered a certain situation. Here's how we resolved it. Here are the bumps in the road that we experienced. Or, you
Oh,
know what?
yes.
This product says it's totally accessible, but I can't even find the start button.
Exactly.
Something like that.
Exactly.
It's just great that you go to that depth and really focus on all aspects of a product from the unboxing of it to like, okay, now it's 3 days later and you come back to the podcast and you say, okay, we like this product much better, or you know what? On the third day, we just decided it was too much of a bother and it's not, there's no way to work around it.
Yep.
Um, you really do put a lot of work into the podcast. So you do the editing on the podcast also?
Yep. Yep. We edit each episode, depending on who's busier that day. Will depend on, sometimes we'll split it, depending on how many inserts and things we have in there. We might split it and say, okay, you take this, I'll take this, and we'll
Mhm.
get this thing edited and ready to go. So, we try and get everything done. We usually do them in one take. We usually just sit down, record them, and we're consumers first, just like everybody else. Yes, we're professionals. We make our living in the industry, but we're first and foremost, we're a couple and we're going through daily life and we run into some of the same weirdnesses that everyone else does. And sometimes it's funny and sometimes it's frustrating. And, because we have this audience, we feel like, well, we don't mind telling on ourselves. If we have a strange adventure, we'll share it. If it makes you laugh or it's something that you can maybe learn something from, great. We have no problem sharing that. We're not very pretentious. We'll just share our little story, and if it's helpful to somebody, then great. So that's kind of my
Mhm.
favorite part of doing the podcast, I think, is just saying, I might not necessarily be. I don't necessarily have all my stuff together, but I'm going to go out in the world and I'm going to make this attempt. And if I fall on my face, well, hopefully somebody can learn something from it because I'll
Mhm.
share it.
And what software do you use to edit your audio?
Depends on what we're doing. He's a very big fan of Studio Recorder and taught me to be a very, very big fan of it as well. So nice APH reference there. We enjoy that very much, and especially for getting the little things out, little pops and clicks and weirdnesses that you can't necessarily get out with some of these other programs. Studio Recorder works great for that. I used Goldwave for probably close to 15 years now. So that's the one that I tend to use if I'm just, sitting around editing something. But SR is also a really great program that we toss into the mix as well. So those are the two we primarily use. He's used Reaper a little bit as well, but wants to do a little more studying of it before, if we ever decide to go back to it for any reason. But it's a great multi-track editor, and we haven't done much with that lately, but it is a tool that's sort of in the toolbox. I would say it's teetering on the edge of the toolbox. We don't use it too much, but it is there should we need it. So those are our two primary editing tools.
Great. Okay. And again, I just want to remind folks, feel free to drop your questions into either the chat or the Q&A box, and we'll be getting to them shortly. Is there anything else that you'd like to share about Mystic Access or yourself before I move on into other areas that you work in regarding your books with National Braille Press and things like that?
Well, I think I'd just say this. I'm a person who grew up in a very small rural town. I'm an only child. My parents did not expect to have a kid, and I showed up, and it was very traumatic and very dramatic, and I was 3 months early, and my parents had no idea what they were going to do with a blind kid, and they finally decided that, well, I'm going to make sure she learns all the stuff she can possibly learn, and that her blindness is not going to be an inhibiting factor in her world. And because of my tenacity and because of their tenacity, it probably helped me to become the adventurous soul that I am today. So, for those who had that framework, I think it's fantastic. But for those who didn't, don't count yourselves out. Just because you may have had a framework where people said, well, you're blind, therefore you're limited to X, Y, and Z. No, absolutely not. But it will require perhaps a change in attitude, and it will require maybe pushing yourself a little harder and going to some of these places that may seem a little scarier. I'm very fortunate that I feel like I had a lot of the background that I did. At the same time, I am a girl from a small rural town, and so the best thing that I feel like I did was go to other places, meet other people, fly, meet people from different cultures. All that was tremendously eye-opening to me, not only in terms of attitudes about blindness, but just in general, just meeting diverse people and learning more. I feel like there was so much growth in that. I would not trade the education, both, in terms of book smart education and the education of just meeting so many diverse people over time. I just feel like if you have the opportunity to fill your life with as much of that as you can, do it. No matter how scary it seems, how intimidating it seems, just take a couple baby steps out into a world that may seem a little less familiar to you because you may learn a heck of a lot not only about other people, but about yourself as you're learning, about these other people. How do you react to the people you're meeting? How do you feel about being out there? It can be a big world, but it has a lot to teach us and it has a lot to offer. So I'm just wanting to put that out there. If you have the opportunity, or even if you don't, try and make the opportunity. Try and give yourself the ability to just get out there and see some things you've never seen because it will make a huge difference, I think, in your life and in how you do your work, whatever that is.
I think experiential learning is so important for
Yes,
both people who are totally blind, but also people that are low vision. Being able to
absolutely.
interact with something up close instead of looking at something from a distance and really interacting with it in as accessible of a manner that is possible. Great
Yes,
advice.
yes, absolutely. Thank you.
So moving on, you and Chris both have worked on books with National Braille Press,
We have.
and I have to say I've used a couple of them. Again, the Google Suite book was fabulous. Have to turn that JAWS cursor on, turn it off, turn
Oh,
forms mode
yes.
on, turn it off. Yes. But
Yes,
also
fun
you have
stuff.
material on using a computer as a newly blinded individual. That's a great reference, and it really does describe the Windows environment in a very digestible manner. Um, what kinds how do these book ideas come about? Do you and Chris think of them? Does National Braille Press approach you? How do you come up with the idea for the book as well as what goes into each of these books?
We got really lucky that National Braille Press had an editor at the time who was very willing to expand on what they were offering in terms of their technology books. And she and I had a first really good experience writing a book. Ironically, the first book I ever did independently for National Braille Press was an online dating book. So this was before my days of being married. And you know, so that was kind of a strange, kind of interesting little thing. But then Chris and I began working together on books, and it could really come from a few different sources. It could come from the editor at the time saying to me, let's sit down and brainstorm some book ideas. How about A, B, or C? Are any of these possibilities? Are these something that you would consider? Basically, what you do is if you come up with something that interests NBP, or if NBP comes up with something and from the publications department that interests you, then if you decide, well, let's move forward on this project, then we would come up with a proposal, and essentially we would sit down and write out a table of contents and say, okay, A, B, C, D, E, here's what we need, here's what it's going to look like. And as the editor at the time told me, she said, don't be a slave to your table of contents. So it's there, it's a reference point, but don't feel like you have to do every single thing in it. But in general, you're going to. In general,
Hmm.
that's going to be your palette to paint with as you are creating this book. So, that part is really fun. It can also be very challenging, and you might go back to the drawing board and say, well, this part works, but maybe not this. Let's cut this. Let's change this. Let's, revise this to be something different. So there is some definite discussion that goes into it. In the case of the first book Chris and I wrote, which was a book called Dinner Delivered, which ultimately ended up coming out at a very interesting time in the world, and MVP actually offered it for free for quite a while during the pandemic. We wrote it the year before. We wrote it in 2019, and very interesting how things came together there, and it turned out to be a very, very timely book. But he and I kind of came up with the idea for it, and National Braille Press liked it. The editor asked me to come up with a table of contents for it, and then we began writing off of that. So it really depends on the book. We actually just released a book that I'll mention because it is another kind of like the computers and blindness book, which is actually one of my very favorites. So thanks for bringing that one up. This is a book about digital safety. So it teaches you about antiviruses and malware and VPNs and scams that you might encounter online. And we had a lot of fun putting that together. It's a lot of very serious topics, but we tried to approach it in a very accessible way and, show people that there are ways to work and to empower themselves and to make that process a little less scary by just having some accessible tools to use when your computer is perhaps having a bad day, or you have somebody who, you feel like is having nefarious intentions and trying to steal your money, so there's a lot of good information. And that was one of those books that, Cassell Wilson, who was the editor at MVP at the time, she and I sat down and had a meeting, and she said, please, would you consider writing this book? And she talked to me about it two or three times, and I refused two or three times. And finally, we came up with an outline that worked for all of us, and was able to put this book together and create something that hopefully is cohesive and useful and powerful for people to read and realize that, they really can make a difference in their own safety and well-being when they're out there browsing the net. So it's a fun process. It's a challenging process, but I love it. Just being able to write books and have people read them and enjoy them. I mean, that was like my first dream. Before I had a music dream, I had a writing dream. So my first dream came true, just not in the way that I anticipated. Surprise, surprise.
Great, great. So, anything else that you'd like to add at this point before we turn it over to Katie for any questions she might have and any questions from the audience?
I do have a couple things. I wrote a couple notes because I wanted to make sure that I made a couple of these little points that, again, I thought might be useful for some people to say. And I was thinking about the college experience particularly, or people just entering the workforce, or perhaps people who don't really know where they want to go or what they necessarily want to do, and are feeling a little down, maybe a little sad, and not quite sure how to take those next steps. So I made a few notes from life experience, one of which is not all opportunities will reap the expected rewards. So we can go back to my music therapy story, and I said, but that doesn't mean that they have to be any less valuable. So maybe I didn't become the music therapist that I initially wanted to be, or maybe I didn't go out and, perform on Broadway, or, win the Grammy, or write, the most popular song of the year, all the things that you kind of say when you're a little kid, the things that you want to do.
Hmm.
That doesn't mean they're less valuable. It doesn't mean that I wasn't able to use all these great experiences and all this learning and all this studying to tremendous advantage in my world. I mean, I sang at my own wedding, I can't beat that. That was a world-topping experience. And just kind of the fun ways that you turn back and you use those dreams that you had and do something else really powerful with them. And you don't necessarily know what that's going to look like. For the college students, I would say you take your school and your studying seriously, but don't forget to have fun. And this is in the workforce too. If you can't have a little bit of fun or laugh at yourself sometime during the course of the day, or just find somebody to have a laugh with, or, just a moment of camaraderie with your colleagues, you know, lighten up. Find a few ways to have some levity in there. Life is stressful enough, work is stressful enough. If you can find the funny side of something sometimes, it truly makes a difference. It's not good to remain in stress and fight or flight, continually during your work or during your life in general. And then finally, every seeming mistake or misstep can teach you something. Okay, if something doesn't work the first time, or if you feel like you continue to hit a wall, step back from that for a moment and think about what there is perhaps that you can learn from that, and what that might be trying to tell you, or maybe how to um, work towards that opportunity the next time, or look at that again with fresher eyes if you were, later on, come back to it, and, just think about it. You don't have to analyze it to death, but maybe think about, is there something I can take from this? And it kind of goes back again to the story that I was saying. Well, I ultimately ended up in a career path that where I was able to use so many of the things that I've worked toward previously, but I had to learn from all the stuff that maybe didn't necessarily go my way the first time. And that leads to my final kind of thought and tip on this, which is when one door closes, sometimes you need to build another door. Sometimes that door is not going to open in the way that you necessarily think. You're kind of thinking, well, maybe something else will appear. Well, sometimes you need to make it. Especially, I feel like in a community where some people will look past us, sometimes you got to build that door. Sometimes you got to shout a little louder. Now, I'm not necessarily saying litigate, litigate. I think advocating is one thing, and I think we absolutely should advocate. I don't think that should necessarily always lead to litigate, but
Right.
you can have a strong voice out in the world, and every day you go out there, and I really feel this, and I know it's kind of a controversial thing to say, but I feel like we're always representing. every time we walk out into the world. And so I always want to kind of try and put my best foot forward and say, this is the best I can do today. And maybe that will bring about more opportunities than I ever expected or that I ever anticipated. And that has happened to me time and time and time again, just by going out there, trying your best. And it may not lead to where you initially thought, but wow, I mean, I couldn't have made this journey up. It has been some kind of crazy and just, whew, a real adventure, and I wouldn't change any of it. So, don't don't let your dreams lock you into something that you think is the only the only thing you can do or the only experience you can have. Go out there, have your experiences, and you know, don't take yourself too seriously along the way. Let yourself enjoy it, whatever comes in the journey.
Great. Okay, and Katie, do you have any questions before we take anything that might be in the chat or Q&A?
Oh my gosh. Well, I just want to say, I'm a Mystic Access um, fan, just for those, in my opinion, for those who, don't know, if you're looking for technology, um, help or wanting to learn something, I downloaded a tutorial at one time. I forget now which one it was, honestly, but I was like, oh, I'm just curious kind of what these audio tutorials are about. And I was familiar with the product that I downloaded the tutorial for, but I listened to it and I'm like, oh, I learned some new things. So my point is, like, it's cool that it's great when you have a resource, you think you might know something about a product, but Kim, kind of going back to your point about we're all a community together and we all learn together. And so just, finding like that hidden gem that you're like, oh, huh, I never realized that this could do that. Or,
Yeah,
on some of the podcasts, like you said, you get something and you think, oh, it's going to be great. It talks, or it's supposed to talk, and why isn't it talking? Or,
exactly.
so I mean, I think it's just really good to, again, to have these connections, to know that, we're not alone, um, and just to be out there and, like you said, be entertained, enjoy it, because, life is short. So that's very cool. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, so we do have a question asking, earlier when you were talking about Braille music.
Mhm.
Someone was wondering if you have any resources or recommendations for finding Braille music.
I wish I did. I really do. And it takes us back to kind of what we were talking about before is, I'm no longer at the space in my career where it's something that I'm continually looking at and doing. I know now there is software to allow us to print Braille music or perhaps to translate music into Braille. And I don't know a lot about what's currently on offer. I remember way back in the day it was like Dancing Dots and some of the stuff that was just incredible. And I don't know how much of that is still a thing or still out there, but I suspect, or I hope at least, that that has just continued to improve over the last couple decades and gotten better. And, I really wish I knew, and maybe that's something that I will try and look into to see what I can find out about what's available. But I know that the software for creating your own has definitely come a long way. I've always wanted to learn some of these cool music programs with all these patches and these things where you can play like orchestral pieces and create them in your
Yeah,
office, at
right.
home. And gosh, I'd
Yeah.
love to make some of this stuff that I can hear in my head come to life. It would blow my mind. So, I'm very interested in that, and I will definitely do a little peeking around and see what maybe I can come up with and find as to some things that are currently relevant in the space, because I would like to know the answer
Mhm.
to that as well. It's a great question. I wish I could help more.
Well, I will say there also is, I hold on, I just grabbed my, there's the Philemon D'Agostino Music School out of New York. And I know that some of their material, I think, can be shared electronically. And they also have turned some of their hard copy collection over to the Andrew High Skill Braille and Talking Book Library in Manhattan. Um,
Nice.
so and they do music transcription, and I know the teachers that I have referred to them are very happy about the music transcription that they do.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I know Bard has some. I
I was
don't
going to
know.
say NLS
Yeah.
has some.
NLS has some. Yeah, I
I
don't
don't
know
know
the
what that
level
looks
of,
like.
yeah, what that's
Yeah.
available, but They
I
definitely do
think
have
they're
some.
adding more. I know I found a book on there that I have yet to read, but it's about not Braille music directly, but it's classical music and like understanding the symphony, which is fascinating to me. So I'm looking
Oh
forward
yeah,
to
I'll have
reading
to
that
read
book.
that.
So
And I've
they're
mhm.
adding more to their musical collection, basically. So
That's terrific.
yeah.
Great.
So we don't have any other questions from the
Okay.
audience at this time. So
So let's see. I have other questions.
Don't be shy, ask questions.
I really do think though, Kim, kind of going back to what you said about, giving yourself those opportunities. I mean, we have a similar story, you and I, in the sense of how we grew up and, um, you know, having growing up in small towns and having ROP and those kind of things. But
Yeah.
really just, giving yourself those opportunities. Don't, you know, you can't do something unless you try it, right? And so, don't be afraid to put yourself out there and like you said, see where you end up and you can learn so much from other people. It's really the world might seem big, but it gets smaller every day. I promise
Oh,
you.
every day. It's so much smaller now than when I was younger. Like when I was in my 20s, the world was a big place, right? And
Yes.
now it's like,
Yes.
you meet people constantly and you have opportunities
Mm-hmm.
like this to meet with you guys and just to have
Right.
conversations and you realize you really do have more in common than you don't. And
Yes.
it's kind of awe-inspiring. Once you
Mm-hmm.
sit down and really talk to people, and I think that's one of the things I really like about meeting so many new people is once you have a conversation, in a few minutes, the blindness isn't necessarily going to be a thing they're thinking about you. Hopefully, they're going to be
Right.
thinking, "Wow, you're a pretty cool person. You've done X, Y, and Z, and
Mm-hmm.
you're kind and compassionate. And you're a good human." And that's where I want people to take things away.
Right. I guess in my question that I thought of would be, with your, you've had a lot of different experiences being a life coach and now working with Mystic Access and doing the NVP stuff. Um, what would you say to someone who might be thinking, "Oh, that sounds great. Like I'd love, that sounds like the perfect job, right? What could be better working for myself and all that." What are some of the maybe things to think about or things to be aware of when looking at maybe starting your own business.
Mm. I think you have to be willing to take a very disciplined approach to it because you're gonna have to do a lot. And unless you have a lot of capital to put into it to hire other people to do it for you, and there are pitfalls in doing that as well,
Hmm.
then you're kind of gonna have to be willing to learn a lot of new skills. And you don't have to learn them all at once, but you have to be willing to take a step-by-step approach and learn a lot of things. So when I was learning all about coaching and going through, months worth of programs to do that and getting a site built because at the time I didn't know a lot of HTML, so I was learning HTML and I was trying to figure some of these things out. And I had someone else
Hmm.
actually build my site initially and came to regret that pretty quickly. And as soon as I could, I redid it and built my own site. There's a lot to learn, and particularly if you are doing your own marketing and promotion. That's an entirely other skill set. You have to be willing to put yourself out there and I also think there's a point that comes for many of us that says, well, I'm trying as hard as I can. And it's a good time to kind of look at yourself and go, well, am I really? Is there more, is there more that I can do? Is there more that I need to be doing here? Or, is this really the very best that I can give in this moment? And sometimes it is. Sometimes you just need to, step back and see if there's a way you can hire additional resources to help you. But in other cases, and this works with life as well as with work, sometimes you have that extra big push in you and you just have to continue to go for it, pretty aggressively in your own life to make things happen. And, you have fun with it, of course, continue to have fun with it. But I think you have to be willing to take an approach where you're going to be wearing a lot of hats when it comes to learning the skills to do whatever it is you're doing, coaching, music, writing, but also the skills that it takes to build the business and get people coming. The build it and they will come thing doesn't really work. You gotta bring people to you. Have to get them
Hmm.
interested in you. Um, Whatever business you're doing, make sure you can write. You must be able to communicate effectively through speaking, having conversations like we are now, and also through writing. Those are very big skill sets that are really, really important. So make those priorities no matter really what you're doing. It's very important that you have those skills under your belt.
Great
Awesome.
advice.
Thank you.
I put the contact information for the music school in the chat, but I don't know if our attendees can see it. It looks like it only
I
went
think
to
it
the
only went to the hosts and panelists. So
yeah, there was no other option. I couldn't.
if you arrow down, you should see everyone
I didn't.
in that drop down list.
Yeah, I don't see that. I see hosts and panelists, and then the captionist, you, me, and Kim. Okay, well,
You tried. You tried.
I
Technology, it's
tried.
We
great.
love
Yes.
technology. Yes.
I I did it again because I did it before, and I thought maybe I missed it. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but it's the Philemon M. D'Agostino Greenberg Music School, in Manhattan. Um, so yeah. Um, if
Put it
you
in the
had
script.
to, if you had to go, and not work, on as an entrepreneur, because you're still, I mentioned, your
Yep.
entrepreneurship earlier, but this, if you had to go and like work a day job, what would be a day job, meaning like, not something that's remote, something where, you were working for someone. What would some challenges for you as somebody who has been in business for yourself for quite a while, face?
Um, I like being a leader. I, I'm not sure I could get used to. I mean, I can be a great team player, but I might get my feathers ruffled a little bit sometimes with other people saying you must do X, Y, and Z. Well, I'm not used to doing X, Y, and Z, on your terms. I'm used to doing those on my terms. So that would be something that I would get used to it, and I don't really necessarily mind it, but it would be a shift, obviously, in how I do things. So I love being on a team. I think that part would be exceptionally rewarding. Being on a team, actually gathering around the water cooler and doing all the things. That part would be fun and great, but I would get used to not being the person in charge and, setting the timetables for things. I could get used to that, but I love the in-person piece. I think overall, it would be a fantastic experience. And, being out there and, particularly if I could do something front facing and, continue to interact with people. Yeah, I would love that. That would be great. I would be very enjoyable of that.
We have a question that came in. I'm interested in your thoughts. Someone is asking, what are your thoughts on using AI for help with things like writing?
um, that's a very interesting question. I enjoy AI. I enjoy playing with it. I enjoy seeing all the wonderful things it can do. I think too much of a reliance on AI, particularly when you are learning, could be very detrimental. You have to have your own skills kind of in place before using AI to perhaps enhance something. A lot of times, and this may change, but a lot of times, once you get used to how AI writes things, you'll know it's AI, and other people will know it's AI. You're going to have your own style of writing, you're going to have your own writer's voice. And I think you can certainly use AI to enhance that or perhaps to make something a bit better, but I wouldn't personally take too much of a reliance on AI because it can make us a little lazy as writers, and having it do too much of the grunt work for us is not going to help us to increase our own skills. I mean, there's always room to improve in writing or in anything else, and I think while it can be a nice adjunct to what we do as writers, I think that's probably where it should stay, as an adjunct, as an enhancement.
And
Great
before you
advice.
mentioned editing software, do you use like anything beyond like Microsoft Word or something like that specific in editing?
I'm pretty much a word user. When working with NBP, we found a few strategies to make things easier. Sometimes when you try and use track changes and you're using, particularly if you have a screen reader on, it will drive
Hmm.
you crazy because it's so
Yes.
verbose. And
Yes.
so, what we do at MVP, and this isn't a trade secret or anything, a lot of things, times what we'll do is one of us, so let's say the editor, will put some changes that she wants me to look at or think about in brackets, and then I will put my own either answers to her questions or potential changes or revisions in braces, and so she can leave
Ah.
track changes
Hmm.
on, but then we can find one another's changes easily. And if she's a very visual person, then she can use her track changes, but I don't have to look at it. And it's very
Yes.
helpful for me because it drives me crazy. And I have no
Yeah.
problem saying to an editor, and we just got a new editor at MVP, so I had no problem saying, this is why I don't use track changes. And she completely
Yes.
understood it. And I
Yes.
guess that's another good lesson to pass on while we're passing on things to possibly express. Don't be afraid to communicate. You have to be willing to kind of sit down with the people you're working with and say, maybe I can modify something in an X, Y, or Z way to make this a little easier, and here's why. You know, it's not about coming in and saying I must modify X, Y, or Z. It's explaining things in a way that makes sense, and then people get curious. They want to learn more about, well, why doesn't this work, or how can this work better, or tell me more about how track changes interacts with a screen reader. Oh, I can show you that. Oh no. Well, that explains why you don't want to use it. Just being willing to have those open conversations with your colleagues.
Right. Oh,
Great.
great. Okay. And are you on LinkedIn or do you prefer people contact you through the Mystic Access website if they want to reach out and
Yeah, if
connect?
they want to reach out to me, I have got to update LinkedIn. It is a sad little thing right now, and I really need to get in and do some updating on my LinkedIn profile. I'm sure it's sort of correct, but it probably needs some love. So the best way to get in contact with me if you want to reach out, and I always love hearing from people, is Kim@mysticaccess.com. Really easy, KIM at MYSTICACCESS.com. Very easy to reach, and that will get me directly.
Fabulous. Okay. And Katie, can you stop the recording and we'll do our closing code.